Okay, let me just start with a thought, and thanks to David as well, who unfortunately isn't with us. But James, David talked about the importance of protocols where possible. He also said, I just want to check what he said, get the wording right. Yeah, and consensus on management. You've given some good examples from the Australian Open, for example, of specific sort of thresholds for stopping play, etc. Are there specific temperatures for stopping racehorses running, for example? I mean, is there that sort of consensus on at what point you just say no?
No, I don't think there's a consistent consensus, at least globally. I don't think there is, and I don't think there can be from what I've experienced.
Why not?
So from the work that I did in Australia, we were looking at exertional heat illness in southeastern Australia, and that was part of the work that I helped contribute to. And the temperature points at which we were seeing large amounts of exertional heat illness in horses were much lower than what we see on a daily basis in Hong Kong.
Okay.
So if we were to apply those in Hong Kong, we wouldn't be racing at all in summer. Now, there are differences in adaptation. I mean, Hong Kong has a more consistent hot temperature environment between when horses are being worked in the morning and the afternoon. So there are individual regional differences, I think, that need to be taken into consideration. And I also think that makes it very important that we can't just be turning to AI bots to be pulling this information. We need to be generating this data at every racetrack that we run at, because what happens at one might not work at the next down the road. So we have individual responsibilities that we are recording this information and learning from our own domestic experience.
But if you buy into the wet bulb global temperature index,
yes,
then presumably you can have a standardized point at which, can't you?
Well, that's what I mean. The temperature that in Australia, where horses were experiencing using WBGT,
right,
was much lower than what it is in Hong Kong.
Okay.
So they're not directly transferable. And again, not wanting to bore everyone, but these indices are complex and they're mathematical algorithms. The WBGT is unreliable in humid conditions. It was based from an American perspective in their local environment. So it's not exactly transferable. It gives you a good indicator. It's a good thing to have up your sleeve, but it's not the answer to say, at this level, we stop.
Okay, adds to the complexity of the challenge, clearly.
And just one more, it doesn't allow us to adapt in the future as we're getting hotter. I think evolution, we will evolve slightly. If we put in arbitrary stop measures now, what are we going to do in 10 years' time or 20 years' time? Maybe we've evolved to cope with that. So if we're looking deep into the future, I don't know if being obsessed around a cutoff point is going to be terribly helpful in us in adapting to the future.
It's interesting to me. I mean, we're going to talk about communication, etc., later in the day, but communicating that message to the great spectator world out there is going to be really tough, isn't it? Because to say it's okay there, but that's not okay there,
yes,
is a difficult message to sell. I won't ask you to expand on it because I think James actually had a question. Then we have one.
James, James, is there a lack of consistency around the data that is collected by racing authorities around the world, or put it another way, is there work that we can do to bring greater consistency about the collection of data at different points between our racing authorities to help that research?
Yes, I think there is, and I think this is where the responsibility of having weather stations on course, at least in collecting that data, is a requirement. I was at a veterinary conference earlier in the year, and there was a very big spread around the room of which vets had weather data available to help them make decisions on their tracks. And I think it's very difficult to justify what's going on if you're at a race course, you're getting horses with heat stress events, and you're not even measuring the weather on site. I think that puts you in a very difficult point from your social license or our social license, because we all are part of the same organisation. Even back to infrastructure, when I started working, I worked at a racetrack in summer where you could only hose 2 horses at once, otherwise the water pressure was too low at the track. So I'm happy I don't work there anymore, but these are real challenges in race tracks around the world, and it's often not the big headline tracks. These are other tracks that make up day-to-day racing.
And actually what you're saying is every track should have those weather, be providing that sort of data. Okay, thank you. We've got a few questions here. Firstly, at the back, and then Paul, then Brandt. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Russell Gold, Nature Broken, thank you for your presentations. Fascinating and harrowing in equal measure. Have you explored using green infrastructure to mitigate heat stress? And secondly, is there any evidence that the selective breeding of horses is favouring breeds or individuals that can cope better in the stress? Are they already, in evolutionary terms, adapting to the heat? Thank you.
Great question.
Field the first part of that
Yes,
question,
please,
and then I'm
thank
going
you.
to throw to you for the second part. Yes, we have looked at natural solutions to helping mitigate heat, and there are definitely examples on British racecourses where we've got lots of natural shade and trees around the parade ring that helps manage those horses and the fans pre-racing and during racing, and I think we need to look at more of that and introducing more of that. And there's been some really good studies, particularly during the recent heat wave, of the impact of shading of trees in London, for example, on the temperature of the surface of compared with tarmac surfaces and open surfaces. So it's on the radar and certainly something we can do more of. And I'm going to throw the horse technical question to James.
I think when we look at what exertional heat illness is in the thoroughbred racehorse, it's metabolic heat production, which is a consequence of exercise. So that internal heat is produced because the horse is racing. The hot weather stops that heat from being released into the environment and the horse cooling down. So in terms of our risk, yes, when it's hot, we can put in a number of things, but it won't stop cases of heat stress, outside of summer, if a horse is producing it. There are individual factors where some horses appear to be more predisposed than others. So yes, there's quite possibly a genetic component to it, and I think you hear stories of that's how this horse races, and collapsing after every race. It is incumbent then on racing jurisdictions and regulators to identify those horses, and I've been in cases where that an individual horse is then given a team of people to cool it afterwards, when really, if we step back from that picture, is that really a suitable horse to be racing in that moment? So yes, there are individual factors. I'm sure that's part of genetic evolution as well. There's probably a bit more work to be studied in it, but when it comes to risk management, I think we can identify what's high risk times for the general population.
Can I also just jump in and just remind everyone that the horse is only 50% of the athlete base that we have.
Yes.
And we often talk about horse welfare, and we're excellent at talking about horse welfare. And we sometimes neglect the other part of the story, which is our human athletes.
Yes.
And although the horses may be incredibly well adapted to running in these conditions, we do have to remember that the human is somewhat weaker and perhaps not so well adapted.
And the human does that all day, and the horse does one race a day for a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
So yes, as a horse fed, I'm a bit scared of stepping outside of my line. So you can fight that.
Probably wise, although one has a choice and one arguably doesn't, which is another point. Anyway, let's move on to, thank you very much for the question, Russell. Paul? Just wait for the mic, thank you.
Paul Kahn, CEO of the European Federation. I was wondering how much we do know about the impact of acclimatization, not only the fact that horses that are traditionally running and used to running and living in very hot climates are going to be more resilient, but also there was something earlier in the day that seemed to indicate that even after a few days of a heat wave, there's a kind of short-term acclimatization that makes them more resilient. How much do we know about that? How much research has been done on that?
You're exactly right. And this is from my experience in Hong Kong compared to Australia, in seeing almost a negligible amount of fulminant heat illness where horses are throwing themselves on the ground in Hong Kong, and I think there's a lot of adaptation plus great infrastructure. I don't think we know a lot I mean, part of the reason I was involved in the study with exertional heat illness when I started was because it wasn't taught at vet school. You know, thoroughbred racing and the veterinary side of thoroughbred racing is a very niche area in veterinary science as a whole. And so it's incumbent on us to then be doing these studies and contributing it back to the science. I think we're moving into a period where we're not allowed to really just learn on the job and learn through mistakes. I think we need to be more educated from the outset, and that involves educating new staff from the outset. And I didn't purposely get up here and talk about surge workforce for vets on hot days, because I really think that's a very limited response for hot weather. We need to be contributing it back to science. We need to be conducting these studies and recording them for other people to learn before they actually start working.
There's a lot more work to be done on that particular point. Thank you, Paul. Brandt, and sorry. Oh no, go ahead. You've got the mic, so then we'll come to Brandt.
Yeah, thanks. I think in terms of jockey welfare, I think in France that jockeys are given a hydration allowance in terms of weight allowance. I think that's a positive step. I know that it's always controversial when you're adding weight and not declaring it for jockeys, and that may impact on horses. But I think during extreme periods of heat, that's something that we should consider. And I know that moving to twilight racing in Hong Kong, the jockeys have complained partly because they feel that they're dehydrating for longer because the races are starting later and they're trying to prepare for that. So that is a thing that I think racing jurisdictions could adapt to and agree upon. I think for horses, we're very lucky that in Shattin we have a covered parade ring, so the horses are going from air-conditioned stables to covered areas, and we do limit their exposure by delaying the time that they spend at the starts and send them to the starts later. So that all helps, and I think that racing jurisdictions do need to consider. I mean, certainly, and it's only anecdotal, but watching Royal Ascot, there seem to be a lot more horses sweating in the parade ring, but they're parading for the same period of time under extreme heat as they are under non-extreme, and it's something that maybe racing jurisdictions could consider.
Okay, thank you for that. Brandt?
Thanks. To you, James, it's a veterinary question. Having worked in racing administration for 30 odd years.
Sorry, Brandt, we're just going to turn the mic on again. You've been nothing but trouble with the mic today, so yeah.
I'll blame that on turning it off.
Oh, it's working now.
Just from a veterinary perspective, James, I think I've perhaps worked at some of those same sort of race courses that you described, where you have one or two hoses back in the day. For me, not being a veterinary scientist, you know, constantly having to make decisions based on the best veterinary evidence that's provided to you on a race day, I've always found that those points you made have been consistent ones, in that there is no one specific indicator that enables you to make decisions, such as the wet bulb globe and all that. You know, it is variable. And similarly, the conditions have to be taken into account. So a group of Olympic performing horses that all move to one location and spend weeks acclimatising, then competing, is a very different set of circumstances to a horse that's trained in the north of England, travelling down on the day and racing in conditions that are 10 degrees warmer over multiple miles. So there's an issue of constant debate that I've had to deal with over years, is this issue of to scrape or not to scrape. I know there are strong views about whether or not, when you're cooling a horse, you ought to scrape the horse down immediately, or one should not. And it is debated constantly and has been for decades. Do you have a view on that, James?
Distraction from, yes, it's. I don't know how. I don't know if it's because people love debating, but it seems like such a moot point in the big picture of things. And I always try and take it back to what we're doing. You know, the horse is heating up from the inside. That heat's traveling to the skin. You're putting cold water on. That cold water needs to take the temperature out. I think water moves heat 42 times more than it does into air. So that's why water's good rather than just walking them in a fan. Eventually that water will come up to body temperature and needs to be scraped off. Doesn't need to happen right away. I know. It could get, you could get very detailed on it. I wouldn't ever tell someone to, if they're busy. Often people are quite stressed on a hot day looking after a horse. I'd leave them alone, do whatever you want to do. If you're constantly hosing a horse, there's no need to scrape the water off. But I think it's a distraction from the real issue.
Exactly, and I think that's the point I'm trying to raise. Is there are so many variables here, and it's about sticking to the principles in terms of reducing the stress and the heat and the risks, irrespective of how you get there.
On that point,
I think, just expanding on that, I think the
Chris
simple, really important thing is to increase or maintain the heat differential between the horse and what you're pouring on it. Yes. And what's far, far more important is that you've got huge volumes of cold water.
Yes.
And rather than wasting your time scraping the water off, put large volumes of water. The very best thing you could do for the horse, and if it's a person, the very best thing you can do is put them in a nice cold bath and swirl the water around and make sure it keeps a very cold temperature. We can't do it in horses because they'll probably drown or drown someone else. But just pour large volumes. So don't worry about the blooming scraper. Just set up the system so you can get large volumes of cold water on them.
I mean, and I know we're running late, but if we think back to that picture that was on David's slides where the horse was kind of bowing in front and there were a whole lot of people standing around watching it and someone had a hose at its head and you think, and the horse is still in the sun, and so what's going on? They're not cooling the horse. They're just, I mean, if you felt awful probably having heat stress and someone bought a hose and just aimed it between your eyeballs, I don't know what it's doing. But I think there's education, there's infrastructure, there's staff training, there's a whole lot of things that need to happen.
I guess my point is really that some will get very fixed on
small areas,
particular approaches, and from my experience over 30 years is there's no perfect solution. It's just about mitigating that risk as much as you can. But, moving from Australia to the UK, I've never seen so many horses suffer from heat-related issues as I have in the UK, which is quite extraordinary.
Yes.
Even, it's often in the springtime.
Yes.
Yeah, says a lot. So yes, please, thank you.
Andrew Chester from the IFHA and the US Jockey Club, and this question is for both Katie and James in regards to stakeholder engagement here, because whether you're communicating a change, whether it's for a season, for a single day of racing that involves trainers, owners, jockeys, but also on the other side of that, punters, wagering companies, etc. So any tips, strategies, advice you could give for this room into communicating that to all the various stakeholders?
It's a really difficult question, isn't it? Because you want to give racing the best possible chance on the day, but sometimes the delay in making a decision is really frustrating for all of those who are waiting to make their plans. I think anything we can do that helps us to make the right decision sooner and communicate that sooner really helps, particularly when we are thinking that this is a spectator sport. We want people to come and enjoy racing, and it really impacts the customer experience if they're being told late in the day, well, racing's abandoned. But equally, it impacts their experience if they're coming to the racecourse and they are exposed to heat all day with no opportunity for shade. And we've seen some interesting research in the UK around the National Trust and how the leisure side of things is impacted by weather. Over 28 degrees, they start to see their attendances and ticketing drop. And I think it's something we need to take into account in the whole picture.
And the reason I decided to focus on twilight racing and the shift of the whole summer season rather than just individual measures is because it takes a long time to prepare a horse for a race, and to get all the way up to the point where a horse is ready to race and that day is cancelled, and then what are you going to do with these horses is finding a way that works to try and minimise disruption to the racing program, giving confidence and foresight for our customers. At least we know that this is going to be our race times for the whole summer series, not waiting for 3 days prior. That might not work for every racing jurisdiction in the room, but it's about finding a system that can help, because it's, as we see the heat trends, it's not going anywhere. We're only heading in one direction, it looks like. So I think it's very important for racing jurisdictions to try and find workable solutions for all the participants.
Thank you for that. Do you have any more questions from the floor? No? Okay, look, we'll draw to a halt there. We've gone slightly over. James, Katie, thank you both very much. Thank you.